So let's go to the Douro. Has anyone been to the Douro? I can see a few. I can see a few. So I think more of you have to go. This is somewhere where I cut my winemaking teeth. I came out of Bordeaux having learned all the theory about winemaking, landed up in the Douro, and it was the biggest lesson in the real world of hard graft in vineyards, under the heat, in the cold. They say often that the Douro is 3 months of winter and 9 months of hell. It's a very extreme, very beautiful place, as I said, majestic. So here we have Lavradores Feitoria. Lavradores means farmers, and Feitoria is the old word, so back in the 19th century, for a winery. And so they've taken this idea because they're a collective. There are 15 of them. They've become solid friends. They have a winery which they built together and shared in bringing together. So what you have here is an expression of, in both these wines, of different terroirs within the Douro. Lately, I wrote a little piece about the Douro and said there's no point in generalizing or making it generic. If you look at the topography of it all, the big slopes, the tributaries up and down the river, you've got lots of aspects, lots of different altitudes, different grape varieties. So it's about little terroirs.
I'm just going to jump in here, Raymond. Sorry, I'm going to share the screen here just to give a little bit of context, hopefully, to the map and exactly where we are and what you're saying about the Douro. So hopefully everyone can see this now.
So if you go west from Porto towards the Spanish frontier.
Yeah, so I use the beautiful map on your website. Actually, there's a few good Portuguese.
Where that arrow is, yeah.
Yeah, but yours is better than anyone's, so I decided to use that.
So no, that's lovely. So you can see from the photograph that that steep terrain, the terraced vineyards. It is very hard work agriculture. I would say probably, well, from the Douro, farmers will say it's the hardest region in the world to grow vineyards in, to tend to them, to pick grapes and all that. So we've got something quite fantastic. Look, let's taste this first white, the Lavradores Feitoria Branco 2019. 2019 was actually very friendly vintage for white grapes. Most of these white grapes come from the higher plateau, so it's not deep in the valleys. So fresher climate, nighttime temperatures dip, so you don't get too much ripeness in the grapes, and that preserves the freshness of them. You've got, I suppose, three main grape varieties: the Malvasia, Fina, you have the Viuzinho, and you have the Códiga, which also comes under the name Correio. But so those are the main grapes, and then there are a myriad of others, which I won't bore you with. So these are harvested from these higher vineyards spread around near the winery, and very simply fermented with natural yeasts, left to, if you like, settle, clear, and bottled fairly fresh. So there's not huge amounts of technology here. It is what it is. These are the grapes from the Douro. This is a very authentic and genuine expression of those particular grapes from those particular terroirs. So I think it's, for me, they're sort of white, soft fruit, sort of yellow, soft fruits, a little bit of perhaps melon there. You're not lower alcohol.
I think it's beautifully aromatic, isn't it? There's something just something really nice and fresh. There's lots of fruit, but it's the freshness and the aromatics that are the predominant thing.
And then you've got this lovely texture in the mouth. I would say, we're not talking big freshness in a sense, but you're talking a nice balance between the weight, the sort of that fullness, warmth that's there. And I think that is about the Douro. It is hot, but it's not overdone here. Any thoughts?
Well, I'd agree with you 100%. Personally, I love this wine a lot. I think there's, as I said, there's plenty of nice fruit there. That's quite we've also got that balance of acidity, a slight minerality I find as well that I get from this wine too, which I think is definitely a nice, almost, as I said, citrus slash kind of stone tropical fruit notes, which are more tropical fruit, I'd say, but those and the citrus notes really have got a great balance to them, which I find extremely enjoyable. Great with food too, as well. I think it's definitely a great food wine as well.
It is. It can cross the boundaries very easily.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting seeing what Nathan says there about it. Feels like spring. I think next up we might be having some people's first rosé of the year, but these wines, yeah, they always feel like you could drink a glass quite quickly if you're in kind of Douro temperatures, but they also stand up to any kind of just about any time of the year. But it's yeah, they're just super enjoyable, very very quaffable, but also there's plenty going on with them.
So I think from this region where to extract decent grapes is hard work, I think it's just interesting to contrast perhaps the yields that you get in the Douro as compared to perhaps Bordeaux. If I'm correct in my last check of the statistics here, in the Douro you're talking 2.5 to 3.5 tons per hectare. In Bordeaux you might be talking 5 to 6. So where it does take a lot of work to produce a kilo of grapes.
Mm-hmm. And am I right in thinking, is it hand harvested here? I assume, obviously.
Yes, all hand harvested.
The steep slopes, yeah.
As you can see from the slopes.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to get machine harvesters in. Although there are some farmers who have perhaps more extensive vineyards and are trialing harvesting machines with a certain degree of success.
Yeah, inevitable eventually, I suppose. There's a bit of a lack of labour at certain times of the year, isn't it? And I think it's, like you alluded to before, it's pretty backbreaking when you've got that heat and the steepness of the terraces and everything. It seems idyllic when you're there on holiday for a long weekend or something, but if you do a whole season of pruning followed by everything else that's involved, and then the picking kind of coming at the end, it's it's pretty serious stuff.
With Portugal, and whenever I try a wine from Portugal, I'm yet to visit and I don't know that much about them. It's always the texture for me that really stands out. Is there anything unusual that they do with the winemaking process, or is it just the terroir and everything else? But I don't know, there's always this sort of almost, it's just such a mouthful.
Yeah, I think, well, thank you for bringing that up. You're right. Most, especially in the whites anyway, the combination of grapes and terroir give you that sort of texture and fullness and weight. It's there. We are talking about a warm country. I think more inland, and you'll have more weight, but as well, depending on the ground, some minerality. If you're more towards the coast, you'll have more freshness to them. But I think the grapes, the natural, the indigenous grapes, and the terroir, yes, do. And that is the difference. And we're not talking Chardonnay, we're not talking Sauvignon Blanc, we're talking Malvasia, we're talking Vieuxingue, we're talking Maria Gonge, we're talking Arinto, and so on and so forth, all Portuguese grape varieties.
That's the thing. I think when you have the combination of all 6 wines tonight are native Portuguese grape varieties, when you have that combination of the environment and the grape varieties themselves, and it creates, like you mentioned there, really like an identity for the country. Obviously, there's nothing about viticulture that is confined by the political boundaries or anything of where we are now. But you can say something tastes Italian, something tastes Spanish, something like that. I think you can definitely taste that with a lot of Portuguese wines. And I think it's down to exactly what you just said. It's the combination of the environment and the grape varieties. And I think that's a really good thing, because there's so many excellent wines from Portugal. There's only a few that have really kind of hit the mass market. Raymond will know much more about this in numbers than I do, but in terms of supermarket and wider consumers, there's still the majority of great regions even are pretty unknown. But there is, the more you taste and the more you kind of branch out and try a few things more than once, for example, there's definitely an identity there. And well, particularly with the good producers and the more.
Yeah, going back to Georgie's point, I think there it is at the moment that texture, that weight, that those flavors are about the grapes. But because Portugal is still very young in its viticultural journey in relation to non-fortified wines, there's still lots of development going on and understanding of all their native grapes, and winemakers being perhaps bolder, more experimental. So I think, so you'll see that change over the next 5 to 6 years, but you'll never get away, or they will never get away from the indigenous grape character that's there. So, a bit more wood or a bit less wood, a bit more, more lees, colder fermentations, warmer fermentations, amphorae, all those things that's going on all around the world as well. So watch this space, really. It's still developing, it's still exciting. I mean, as you pointed out earlier, I've been in it 30 years, but I feel it's only just beginning, which is so exciting.
Yeah,
right.
I didn't realize how young it was, really. When you look at it like that, I guess it does give it a different light on it all. But yeah, thank you for that.
Sure, awesome. Should we move on to the second wine? So we're staying in the Douro Valley, and we are even staying with the same producer. I guess technically it's, as Raymond alluded to a second ago, it's a collective of 15 different growers. While you're pouring again, I'm very quickly going to share my screen, as I've kind of just chosen some pretty shots of the Douro Valley, really, because we're in the same part of the world, and we are the same group of growers. You can see big picture of them here. I don't know if that's everyone that's involved, but it's certainly some of the key players in the shot here, and some more of the steep terrace slopes. I put a nice sunny one in as well for this, since we're moving on to a rosé.
Yeah, it's either, Luke, it's either the people are very small or the dog is huge. I don't know.
True, yeah, I think.
No, the dog is huge.
Yeah.
It's a proper, whatever it is, special hound. Belongs
it
to,
looked like anyone could ride that
Quite
around
impressive.
the vineyard. Yeah.
it belongs to the guy who's sitting behind the lady who's sitting on the floor. And he's but it's a very tame thing.
That's good to know. So we are Touriga Franca. I noticed the technical notes for this one is Touriga Franca and others. I don't know if you're familiar with the others, Raymond, and I wouldn't necessarily expect anyone to know when that's on the technical notes, but it's a very Douro thing to have. The one wine that everyone's familiar with that does have quite a lot of history here is obviously the fortified port wines, and I think this is something that's kind of a hangover from history, but in a good way. That there's a lot of jumbled up vines in the Douro Valley, and and haven't necessarily all been identified, or if they're in such small parcels, or they're so jumbled up that to put a percentage on a blend is kind of either impossible or just unnecessary, or possibly both. And so I know that we're majority Touriga Franca with the rosé, but apart from that, I'll let you say a few more words on the rosé here. I'll stop sharing.
Well, like you point out, it's a very ancient region, and has been producing wines for, well, growing grapes, vineyards for 500, 600 years. So there is, and this is the particular thing about Portugal. Portugal being on the edge of the Iberian Peninsula, on the edge of Europe, miles from perhaps the birthplace of Vitis vinifera, which is near Armenia and Turkey and things like that. Things took a lot longer to progress that way in evolutionary terms, but also in evolutionary terms, because Portugal was out of it, all these grapes were allowed to kind of develop on their own and genetically mutate, genetically change, and become Portuguese. So let's go back to the Touriga Franca and the Douro. There are 200 odd identified grape varieties, but the thing to retain here is for Douro reds, and because this is a red grape variety, the main two are Touriga Franca and Tinto Roriz. And Tinto Roriz is just a different clone of Tempranillo that you see in Spain. So Tempranillo, Tinto Roriz, I suppose technically you could say they're the same, but there are different clones in different areas of the Iberian Peninsula. So in a way, it's a very Iberian grape. So the others are quite a lot of Tinto Roriz or Tempranillo, and then you'll have Tinto Count, Trincadeira, a little bit of Touriga Nacional, etc., etc., etc. So in rapidly decreasing proportions.
Yeah, so most it wouldn't be a one-word answer to that.
No, most of the vineyards, if you like, just quickly, the old vineyards were field blends. So farmers used to just plant, one or two vines of Touriga Franca, 10 vines of Tinto Roriz, a couple of Touriga Nacionals, some, and mixing in white as well. So old vineyards are like that. So you never quite know what the proportions unless you did a kind of inventory. New vineyards, so vineyards from the late 70s onwards, were mostly batch planted. So you'd have 2 or 3 hectares now, and there are quite a few of them, 2 or 3 hectares of Touriga Franca, next to 5 hectares of Tinto Roriz, next to 6 hectares of Touriga Nacional, and so forth. And this changed the winemaking as well. So instead of just going into a vineyard, picking all the grapes and putting them in a vat and fermenting them and coming out with a field blend wine, they now a lot is fermented by grape variety and then blended after that. So this is a mixture of those two things. So you've got old vines, young vines. So that's why they can actually say that there's a lot of Touriga Franca in here. So Touriga Franca, very, very unique to the Douro. It's got tremendous berry fruit character, but soft berries. It's not brambly or anything like that. And I think that comes through. It's interesting that this is a 2019, so a lot of people are looking at 2020s already because people like, oh, fresh, the fresher the better. Not necessarily. And I'm seriously impressed with the way this is handling itself in bottle, and it still has that freshness, and it still has that sort of mark of a good rosé. Like I said before, 2019 was a relatively fresh year. So that comes through, those berry notes are still there. And on the palate is still fresh.
Yes, and what does everyone think? Is this the first rosé a lot of you would have had this year? I know it's Doesn't tend to be the first colour you go for in January and February, but I think it's been possibly warm enough to branch out, but I don't know. What does anyone think? Anyone had a Douro or Portuguese rosé before?
I'm sure many have. The Mateus. I was going to end with that story, but you know.
Yeah, well, I think what the Branco and the Rosé they've both been on our sommelier selection for a long time, and any of you that are particularly familiar with it will know there isn't that many kind of permanent places. Well, there aren't any permanent places on that list. It's quite limited, and so the fact that they've both been on there for a number of vintages now is a testament to, I think, just how enjoyable they are and their brilliant value, and not necessarily what everyone would, the country everyone would go to immediately for rosés, but as we've proved with a couple of Italian ones now, but particularly this one as well, there's any number of places where you can make a really, really enjoyable, slightly different, but not too out of the box style, but something that it ticks all the boxes. So I think there's fresh, it's fruity, and I think great with seafood. It would be the classic sort of thing, some shellfish or something like that.
Yeah, but it has lovely body as well, and the flavors come through well.
I think it's fair. I think it's fair to say, Raymond, that Tom and I are not massive rosé drinkers, and so we sort of have a limit of how many rosés we'll allow on the sommelier selection list. And the characteristic of rosé that I absolutely hate is dilute and acidic, or even worse, dilute, acidic, and sort of pretending to be sweet when it doesn't deserve to be. And so what I really like about this, and the few other rosés we have on the list all share this, there's a certain voluptuousness about it, a certain presence, a texture, some body to it, something really nice. So I think rosés have a hard time getting onto our sommelier selection list. So it's always nice to see this one there.
Thank you.
Couldn't agree more. That's the thing. I think there's and as a general category, the popularity's skyrocketed. But again, I think a lot of that could be at the kind of more general level, and everyone seems to go to Provence or other parts in south of France for that particular style. But I think there's so much potential for any number of different depths of color and styles and things of rosé. I'm really pleased that we have this one. We can introduce it to as many people as possible. I think we just keeping an eye on the time. We're ready to move on to wine number 3, the first of the reds, the Quinta de Correio, Tinto. So
this wine is probably one of our best sellers, just putting it out there. This is absolutely, it's been a knockout for many years now. It really has great value, such as all these wines, but this is really, again, one of my favorites, and one of our club members' favorites as well for, again, many years now. It's absolutely stonking wine, really is. Just before you guys try it. So the expectation is up there now. Hopefully it will meet those expectations as well.
You've built it up, Angus. That's a good job. But yeah, this one, in terms of the number of bottles that we sell, is definitely up there. Just because of all the things we've said before, there's a bit of a theme with these first 3 wines. They really do tick all of those boxes of quality and value and everything that we insist that everything does. But you don't get a great deal for your money sometimes, but below the sort of £13-14 mark. But particularly from Portugal, you definitely can, and these wines definitely tick those boxes. The theme changes slightly after these first, so it's not all going to be along that. So just got a very basic introduction here. We're now in Jiao, which is, as you can see, just below, south of the Douro Valley, around about the same distance from the coast. But yeah, there's a certain amount of elevation. I'll let Raymond go into a little bit more detail about this in a moment, but different environment altogether. I think generally a a fair bit cooler, which you wouldn't necessarily expect being further south, but I think that's generally the case. And a bit more lush, a bit more green in the landscape that you can see in these images that I've put here. And yeah, predominantly Jaén, but I'll let Raymond go into a little bit more detail about this when I'll stop sharing the screen now. So we're in this purple area.
Okay, so let's say the word Dão, D-A-O, central northern Portugal. We, as winemakers, we get a bit sort of excited about the rock, get a bit obsessive sometimes. The Douro is about schist, which is like decomposed clay. It's very brittle rock, and produces quite a lovely sort of soft textured soil, and then all the bits of rock around it as well. The Dão is granite, so granite and slightly sandy granite too, with some clay. So if that means anything to you, great. If it doesn't, I'm sorry. But this does change things at vineyard level. Schist absorbs the heat and then re-emits it, so things get warm, and then they stay warm. Granite gets warm during the day, but it doesn't really heat up, so vineyards cool during the night. So the grapes usually from the Dão are less ripe. So if you took the same varieties planted in the Douro and put them in the Dão, you'd get more minerality, more freshness, less ripeness generally. So just to give you a kind of difference how the rock plays. But also, it doesn't mean to say that they don't have the same amount of color, because granite has silica in it and reflective material. So the sun shines down and then reflects back up. So the grapes, especially the red ones, get plenty of sunshine to ripen. The season's slightly shorter in the Dão, which favors a different set of grapes in this case. So here we have Jaén, Alfrocheiro, some Tinta Roriz, which is a Tempranillo, and a touch of Touriga Nacional. So Alfrocheiro and Jaén, which is the same as Mencia, actually, in the Bierzo in northern Spain, has a sort of short cycle, and this is well adapted to the Dão. So summer usually comes late and autumn comes early. So the grapes have to juggle with that. So being like that, you never get too much alcohol, you never get too much ripeness, but you preserve all this freshness. And I think the zing, I use that expression, the zing, the brambly fruit, the punch is there in this wine. Quinta do Correio. Correio just means the postman's vineyard. He used to belong to a postman. And that's where he lived, and he sold it to the family who owned it at the moment. This 2017 was the last vintage from that particular vineyard, because in October 2017, you probably would have heard of it all over the news, big fires ripped through central Portugal, devastating a lot of vineyards and a lot of eucalyptus forest and a lot of pine forest, which is another characteristic of the Dão vineyards, in amongst eucalyptus forests, in amongst pine forests. So this vineyard no longer exists, and it's being replanted as we speak. So enjoy this 2017. It was a great year, perhaps one of the most balanced years of the past 5, from 2012 onwards. So you've got lovely freshness. You've got this slightly riper fruit, but brambliness, and then this nice texture, grippy tannin, but it's still yields fruit off the top of it. So I love this wine. Only 20,000 odd bottles produced.
Yeah, I think we probably
Yes.
get a decent chunk of that. Yeah, by the sound of it, it's relatively small quantities, isn't it? I don't know how many of you will have had this one before this evening, but any thoughts on the Quinta de Correio?
It's always interesting. Sorry to add. I just think it's always interesting to find. Raymond mentioned the pine trees around. There's definitely some herbaceous pine note in the wine, which adds another layer, just rather than the like primary berry fruit. There's also another layer which I absolutely adore about this wine as well. And judging from obviously because of the fires, 2017, there's only obviously a limited amount to go around. So definitely advise, if you do like it, stocking up while it's around, because no doubt it will vanish off the smelly section as it usually does. But yeah, any other questions or comments about this wine, or thoughts even as well?
Schist jokes also welcome. Yeah, well, I think that's right. I think there's again, it's that kind of uniquely Portuguese thing that sometimes you can get that sort of that waft of something that smells a little bit like a port wine. So it's those native Portuguese grapes, I guess, where you get it, because there was some Tinto Roriz in here, Touriga Nacional, and so those would be the port grapes, and I guess that might be why there's that similarity to something like a port. I assume it tastes a fair bit different to how it smells in that case, but we will come to the port in a second. But yeah, I think there's a really nice spice to it as well, and I think you get that across Portugal. But it's like Angus was saying about the herbal character. There's just a little bit of spice, a little bit of crunchy character, but it's like that just right enough, but super refreshing.
There's a nice thing here, Raymond, about how quite a lot of still reds from Portugal, when they're younger like this, they have there's a nice warm depth of fruit on the nose, and then a nice crunch to the fruit when you taste it. But also this one's got a nice whack of leather as well. So it's not just all fruit. There's a good whack of spice to it as well. But it's not trying to be something it isn't. It's a great sort of wine. It's a great sort of wine to go with Portuguese meat and food. Basically, it's got enough complexity to intrigue, but a good whack of fruit that's going to excite you. And I think Jose Mark's comment, it smells a bit like port on the first sniff. Yeah, it's those grapes. They're making you think of that. But there's no tar or anything there. It's warm. Right, it's warm, ripe, crunchy fruit, basically.
Thank you, Nathan.
Yeah, I would agree. It says again, it's definitely those layers. It doesn't just have the primary fruit. For a wine of a relatively modest price, which it is, and again, very forgiving style almost, it definitely has those layers of complexity there, which you'd love to find in wines like this.
Well, if you're anything like me and you sort of already started to taste the other red, you see, it's a nice textbook example of what happens when you pay twice the price, basically, and go a year older.
Awesome. All right. On that note, so next up we are Luis Pato, the Vinhas Velhas, and I will very quickly share the screen again with this one. We are sure. So we're going down to Barbeito, and if I'm pronouncing anything massively wrong, please pick me up, because I've been to Portugal a couple of times, but certainly don't claim to have picked up any of the lingo in any great detail. So yeah, if anything's completely wrong, but then I believe we're 100% bagger, but then I think there's something quite unusual that happens to this wine. But I'll hand over to you, Raymond. We've got a really fascinating producer, a very pioneering producer that I'm sure you know plenty about. But we are in this blue area here, just towards the coast from from Dow, but about the same altitude. And then you have some bag of grapes, and you can see that the landscape's a little bit different. It's kind of like rolling hills, but I think you lose some altitude as you go towards the sea, but it's I'm sure it's not massively flat, as you can see. But yeah, I'll let you say a few words about this one then.
Okay, so from a regional point of view, I always look at the Bairrada and think it's quite dinky, because again, it's very sort of soft rolling hills with interspersed with little bits of forest, pine trees, eucalyptus, small vineyards. But going back to this, it's made from one grape variety, which is Baga, B-A-G-A. And that's very unusual for Portugal. Most regions are combinations of many grape varieties, like we've just seen in the Down and in the Douro. The Bairrada, unusually, has a sort of been invaded, colonized by the Baga grape. And the Baga grape is both very productive and very sort of versatile. So because of that, and because of the clay soils and the proximity to the sea, and fairly damp, I suppose, in a sense that the rainfall was good, it produces good amounts of grapes that you can both pick early and late. So the early picked stuff usually goes for sparkling wine, and Bairrada is, I suppose, it founded its winemaking credentials by producing very credible sparkling wines with early picked Baga produced in fairly good quantities. But with older vineyards, and if you let the grape ripen a little bit more and you control the yield, you can make a very, very, very interesting red wine. And these wines are perhaps the most long-lived of all Portuguese reds. They have that combination of tension, acidity, lightness, but again, ripeness as well. It's a very unusual fruit character. So, and here we have like the pioneer of Baga, the man who perhaps put it on the map more than anyone in the last 40 years, Luís Pato. And Pato just means duck in Portuguese. And so most of his labels have some sort of duck on them. Him and his wife have many vineyards. His father, he inherited his father's vineyards as well. His father used to make some wine and then sell it to the local co-op or negociant or whatever. So Luís began bottling in 1980. And he has a fantastic library of wines. So sometimes when you go and visit him, he'll pick out some old ones, 80, 82, 85, things like that. And they are so still full of life. And that is Baga. This 2016 is from what he calls his Vinhas Velhas. So it's from one particular vineyard called Quinta do Moinho, and then a few leftovers from his single vineyard wines, which is Vinha Pan and Vinha Barrosa, two distinct sites, but he bottles separately. So some aging in very simply fermented natural yeast and all that, and then aged for around a year in used or seasoned oak barrels. Most of them are larger ones, 600 litres, not your Bordeaux barrique. So 2016, weird year in the Bairrada, quite a cool year up to the end of August, and then there was a lot of rain, and then it just dried up and warmed up. So you had a very late sort of summer, and most vignerons hung on. So the rain came, and they thought, no, we're going to wait. And the weather was fantastic, dried up everything, ripened everything. So it was one of those very, very sort of late Indian summer harvests. And I think you get that here. There is ripeness, there's you talked about pine forest. It's there. Another characteristic of Baga, when you smell it, it's that pine forest, what I call the forest floor, almost the understory. It's that the mulch of pine needles and earth, and that comes through a lot. And then you get this sort of overlay of crunchy, zingy red fruits, perhaps more towards the red currant than black currant and blackberries and things like that. So it's a very distinct set of flavors. And then on the palate, there's just wonderful energy, which you get from Baga. And whatever year you take it from, there will always be this energy on the palate, this vibrancy that brings it up. And they're fascinating wines as well, because we'll open this bottle today and we can drink it over the next 4 or 5 days, and it just holds its line. It doesn't sort of get old or stale or oxidized or jammy or anything like that. And that's another characteristic of Baga. So they lend themselves to longevity too.
That's the thing. I think that this definitely is one of those top kind of underappreciated or just maybe unknown Portuguese native grapes that deserves a lot of attention when it's made in a particularly good way. Just got this note. Tom, our wine director Tom Harrow, wrote quite a gushing it was a cross between a review and a tasting note for this wine a few months ago. I think it's the first time he tasted it in a while. I'm quickly going to read it out because he does this to other people. He's not here to be embarrassed by it. But I'm quickly going to read out this note from Tom because I think it's quite well put. There's Barbeito and Baga are hardly household names, even in the most sourdough and homemade kimchi reeking West London residences. But Luis has done more than anyone to garner attention for the region and its signature grape. Some commentators have suggested its similarity to Nebbiolo, and Luis's Vinhas Velhas has a faded hue, dried violets, and wood polish aromas of Valentina or maturing Roera wines, or the more herbal, savoury salinity and spicy acid profile of Etna's Nerello Mascalese, or cool vintage Aglianico de Volce. It's a wine which never fails to provoke discussion. It always intrigues and often surprises. It even challenges tasters. It evolves, but it keeps its freshness, both in the glass and in the cellar. Is intense and fine-boned, succulent and savoury, lean and long, with fruit veering from cranberries to dark plums. And I think he's put that as good as anyone can, but it's just it's one of those wines that's so interesting, and you could probably sit and nurse a glass of it all night, but definitely a bottle. And I think Luis, this is his flagship label, I believe, for Baga anyway, and it's great.
Lovely words by Tom.
Indeed, yeah. Are there any thoughts? Anyone's first taste of Baga? I know. I think this was mine, where a good 18 or so months ago. But there's a lot going on in there.
Can I ask a question? How does the 2016 compare with the 2017?
2016 Baga, because of its kind of Indian summer characteristic, has perhaps more development at the same stage than 2017. 2017 was more of a classic vintage, a little more robust. The Baga tended to be a smaller harvest, so fewer grapes on vines, so a little bit more concentration, essentially. But still, still that characteristic energy and life and freshness there. So it'll feel more younger in many ways, fuller as well than 2016, I think. But 2016 again is one of those weird things. In fact, we tasted yesterday one of his single vineyard wines and thought, against the 2015, we haven't had his 2017, but it felt more developed, but actually was drinking very, better than the 2015. So I think it's about, how you like your reds, or as you get more into Baga, how you like the expression. Does that help?
Yes, no, thank you. It's just that on the Honest Grapes website, they've got the 2017, not the 2016. So
it's just changed literally a couple of weeks ago, I think, maybe 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Hence why. But good question.
Yeah.
So just a little bit more of a sort of riper edge, and perhaps a little bit more grip to the fruit element.
thank you.
No,
Okay.
Yeah. Soon. Okay, conscious of time, let's move on to the first of the two fortified wines that we have. So we are heading.
Can I interrupt there?
You do, yeah.
Can we do it in reverse order? Can we start? Can we do the port first and the Madeira last? And I'll explain why.
Yeah. Okie dokie. We're going to be pouring the Niepoort Tawny Dee.
Oh, sorry. No. The Niepoort Tawny Dee.
There we are. So while you're pouring, I'll very quickly share the screen here, because we're going back to the Douro. It's not too much you haven't seen before. The various different parts of the Douro, but it's quite difficult to pin down exactly where certain grapes come from. But we are. Oops, I think I've shared the wrong thing here. I'm going to stop sharing. Right, amateurish of me. Okay, here we are. So. So we've got the illustrious Dirk Niepoort here, and a slightly different map of the Douro that we had before. It kind of looks a little bit more detailed, but there's just some context there to where Porto is down on the coast, with the Vila Nova de Gaia, which is where all the traditional old port houses are, with the cellars and the maturing. The maturing cellars and warehouses where all of the barrels sit traditionally, and then further up the river Douro, you come to the grape growing regions, which is predominantly the Cima Corgo here in the around the town of Pinhal. It's the main town, and then just more beautiful terrace vineyards. You've got Dirk here and Touriga Nacional. Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing. Over to you, Raymond.
Okay, so here we are with Port, the one of two great fortified wines of the world, and what I suppose is better associated with the Douro Valley. So the heritage of the Douro, it was very much built on this wonderful fortified liquid. But like we started with non-fortified, that's how it started as well. So fortification only really came in sort of mid 19th century, as volumes and demand grew. There was a need to kind of introduce a sort of preservation to the wine because it was all transported in barrel up around the world. And the rich Douro reds, say, were maybe 15, 16%, weren't perhaps as stable as they could have been. So fortification was a kind of developed thing until then, and then became established. And that's really how we see port now. So what is fortification? It's just the addition of grape spirit, around about 77%, to a fermenting liquid that stops the fermentation and leaves you with an alcoholic yet sweet blend or product. And that is port. So you can do lots of things with port. You can not age it very much and put it in bottle if it's exceptional, and that's vintage port. And the rest is about how long you leave it to age. And traditionally it's aged in wooden vessels, so large oak, smaller oak, and that gives you kind of different expressions as well. So, and also the way you make the blends, because most port is a blend, either of vineyards or different years. And here with the Tawny Dee we're talking about perhaps maybe lighter wines from 2 to 3 different vintages blended together, aged in small barrels. So there's an element of warm, younger fruit here, yet on the other side, there's this kind of mellowness, a little, not compotted fruit, but anyway, let's taste. There's a sort of spirit note as well. There's just enough grip. You can just pick out that seasoned wood, some pruniness, dark plums, stalks as well.
That's it. I think the prune character sort of, it has that slightly dried, like nice and then like concentrated flavor that comes from drying. There's quite intense on the fruit character, but as you mentioned before, it's not a ruby port, so it spends the time in the barrel, so it has that sort of micro oxygenation thing, so it's towards the kind of the nutty, slightly savory end of fruit, as opposed to big, dark, ripe tannic fruit.
Yeah, I think the word tawny sometimes is a misnomer. I think what we're talking about here is a young port of a slightly lighter style and aged in small barrels. They do the other side, which is what they call the Ruby Dum, and that is a young port aged in slightly bigger vessels, so it doesn't lose its primary fruit as quickly, and therefore comes across fresher and younger and more, perhaps a little bit more vibrant in the red hues, the red and blue hues of the color.
Yeah, I think what Niepoort does really well with those two, so they kind of a twin pair. So you've got the Ruby Dum and the Tawny Dee, and they kind of buck the trend a little bit, or they really display that port doesn't have to be something that's either left to age for a really long time and has this sort of traditional old man look behind it, but it can be very, very drinkable at not particularly old age. It doesn't need loads of maturation. There's definitely some maturation to this, but it can be something that's just much more drinkable, much more of something that you could turn to It doesn't have to be at the end of a really long night or anything like that. It can be an aperitif. It can be just something that's much more versatile and drinkable and affordable as well.
Yeah, and just let me quickly go back to Niepoort. Niepoort, small family company, now in the 6th generation, or again, family members at the head. Dirk Niepoort, perhaps the most recent pioneer in that family, who has managed to take the fantastic legacy that his forebears left on the port side and used that skill to produce some fantastic unfortified wines. So if you'll come across Niepoort in ports, and you'll come across Niepoort in just Douro wines, as well as the Down and the Bairrada more recently, but it is that sort of love and passion and attention to detail that all these generations have passed down, and Dirk has been able to sort of pivot to make some fantastic red and white wines from the Douro in his own vision. And now, bizarrely, this is a port house, or originally a port house, which now sells more unfortified than it does fortified. So that's the level of change, and which is a tremendous thing, because that is the Douro. The Douro is about the two things, and they can coexist, and each contributes so marvelously to each other. So one feeds off the other.
That's it. I think he's definitely at the forefront of pioneering certain different styles and dry styles and everything. But there's any number of really exciting producers now, isn't there, in the Douro Valley in particular, and there seems to be a really good spirit of collaboration between a few of them as well. They team up quite regularly to make some really exciting projects. Just conscious of time now, I think if we can just jump onto the final to the Madeira. And yeah, sorry, so I did get the ordering wrong. This seems to happen just about every tasting, where we changed the order of at least one of the wines. So we're going to finish over in Madeira, and I'm even quicker than all the other ones. Going to show you the outlying island of my agonizing story from 2020. Is I was supposed to visit Madeira for the first time, rebooked the flights a few times, but it just didn't work out. So haven't been before, but I'd love to go one day. I'm sure we'll rebook the trip eventually. So you can see we're quite a distance from mainland Portugal, around about 950 kilometers, I think, from mainland Portugal out here in the Atlantic, and around about 500 kilometers north of the Canary Islands. So a little bit of context there. And this map here, the vineyard areas are in the yellow. And yeah, we are the house, or certainly the winery and the storage facility for Barbeito, where this particular Madeira is from. It's not too far west of Funchal, so we're here somewhere, and the majority of the vineyards are in this area as well. Camaro de Logos, that is indeed how you say it. Very steep, sloping terraces, as in the Douro Valley, not quite extreme kind of vineyard conditions. And yeah, there's also some pergola training for quite a lot of the grapes that there's this photograph just here. So where the vines grow up, and the vineyard workers will actually pass underneath to pick the wines from above, unlike traditional training techniques that are much more common everywhere else these days, just in rows and things like that. So use of pergola quite a lot in Madeira. But yeah, Raymond, if you could say a few words about this one, please. Stop sharing.
Yeah, so Madeira is a piece of rock in the middle of the Atlantic and draped in vegetation, essentially. And some of that vegetation is vineyards. And I say draped because everything seems to just be hanging in there. You feel that if somebody pulled one vineyard or one vine out, everything would cascade into the sea. Rainfall is high, so vines are productive. Madeira has a long history. As long as as ports history. And so, you know, here we have the two most wonderful fortified wines of the world, without equal. So what's different? One, where Madeira is, and two, the grape varieties are very different. The main grape variety that's grown all over it and very well adapted to it is Tinta Negra. So this Rainwater is mainly Tinta Negra. And then there are other grape varieties, which are called the noble grape varieties, which you might have come across, which are Malvasia, Verdelho, Boal, Cercial. Anyway, here we have Tinta Negra and a touch of Verdelho. So why is it called Rainwater? Well, it does rain a lot. And legend has it that the first iteration of this style came about because somebody left some barrels on a quay on ullage without the bungs in them. And why did they do that? Because in the 19th century, in the 18th century, they had no quay, there was no dock. So the barrels of Madeira would be floated with swimmers across to the ships at anchor in the bay and then hauled up and then topped up when they were on board. But legend has it that there was a big storm, so the barrels stayed on the beach, got water in them. Anyway, eventually ended up in Baltimore, because that's where they were destined for. And the American wine merchant was very impressed with this wine that he'd received. And it was unusual in that it was slightly lighter. And so the story came back that actually, yes, I'm sorry, it maybe took a bit of water because the barrels were left out in the storm and in the rain. And so it was coined Rainwater. But effectively, it's just a lighter style of Madeira, a little bit fresher, less aging. What is also special about Madeira is because it's a rock in the island, it's slightly, in the Atlantic Ocean, it's slightly subtropical. The temperatures are warm mostly. So 15 degrees is the coldest it possibly gets in the winter, up to 35, 36 in the summer, the height of the summer. Traditionally, they used to have the barrels in sheds, and those sheds get warm. And that warmth of a wine in a barrel accelerates its aging and gives you this sort of baked, toasty character. And that's what characterizes Madeira. It's that sort of baked, toasty character. So the sweeter the grape, the more caramelization or the more toastiness you get, those citrus peel, those nuttiness, those characters. This is perhaps the beginning of that journey. So Rainwater, Tinta Negra with some Verdelho in it. And Barbeito, very small, again, a bit like Niepoort in the Douro. Barbeito is to Madeira, small company, run by the family, and Ricardo is what I'd call, I suppose it's living pioneer. It's about getting freshness, getting finesse, getting expression from the grapes, and he's probably the first guy to really delve into the vineyards. And you on the map. Luke showed you that there was southern vineyards and northern vineyards, and they're very, very different. So in the north, it doesn't get the sun, so they're slightly fresher, the grapes. In the south, they get more ripe. So the combination of those things can allow you to do many, many different styles and blends and make use of the best grapes too. So, and why have I served it last? It's because of that baked character. It's got higher acidity as well than port. So it comes across much more intense than port in many ways. And so if you have port after Madeira, it kills the port. But the other way around, it's fine.
Interesting. Yeah, I
Do you
think
think that? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Jump in.
Is someone else saying something? With Madeira, do you think that it I don't know how to phrase this without sounding well, not rude, but do you think it needs sort of help to get out there? Because I feel like people don't really drink it. It's a bit like sherry, where it needs that, it's so underpriced, and it's sort of just one of those wines that sort of gets dusty in the supermarket. And I don't know how do you market it and sort of encourage people to, because it is so good. It's sort of trying to get that across. But does it need help? Is there an audience out there that is still sort of buying it regularly, I guess, is my question.
Well, I suppose like the generations of winemakers change and have a different outlook to how they're making it. So the same applies to those who are drinking it. And I think perhaps, and with all due respect to the old crusties, their vision of Madeira is perhaps a vanishing thing. It's maybe further west than where Madeira is now, and Madeira is moving further east, in the sense that where its main market is Europe and the East too. It's actually expressing itself rather than being something it wasn't. It was perhaps a little bit engineered in the past. Does it need help? Yes, it does need help, but it needs help from people like you who realize that it is a wonderful wine, and it needs us to tell that kind of story and focus in a lot on the house and the growers. So, you know, some people ring us up and say, "Oh, have you got some 1812 or some sort of Cial, you know, 1884 or something like that?" And you go, no, those wines have long disappeared. And there's this sort of pause, and they go, So, but then at tastings, when we could have them, people are tasting that and going, "What's that?" And so we don't say anything necessarily. "What's this?" "Oh, it's Madeira. And then you tell the story, and suddenly people are engaging with it and saying, "What we're loving what we're drinking."
I think that definitely seems to be the key, doesn't it? To get it in front of people. It's not unlike sherry, but what Barbeito are doing. So they have some dry whites now as well, don't they? That they're making. And
yeah.
Even with the branding and things, they're quite fresh. They're quite fun with that sort of thing. So they're definitely moving in the right direction with that kind of thing. And then focusing on being a food wine, or just more versatile, and saying this is when you can drink Madeira. It's not just for.
Yeah, I think that's what people need. They need telling. Like, it sounds bad, but they do need that sort of situation handing to them, because if you say to Madeira, people just think, "Oh, I don't like sweet wine," and they sort of just get so lost in like this world that they don't really understand. And I think for this, I think you just need to sort of sell the experience. You could be like sitting outside on a summer's evening sipping Madeira, and you know, but it's so enjoyable and so tasty that I think it's just giving it that sort of representation again in the
Yeah, exactly. I think people have been saying sherry's the next big thing for all the kids in London, and all the kids everywhere else are going to be back into sherry now. It's cool again. And it never really quite gets there. I think there's a decent niche market for it now, but it's still massively undervalued. And for the same reason, it's a real struggle, I think. And it has lots of the same selling points. Like it goes brilliantly with nuts, with olives, with some of those things where other wines they don't really work. It's quite a unique sort of pairing situation that you can use, and all of that kind of thing. So there's so much going for it. But as a brand Madeira, yeah, I don't quite know how you can really make it go a bit more stratospheric than just within either wine geeks or just wine enthusiasts like yourselves that are open to just trying new things. You know, it somehow needs to be bolstered a bit more than that. I don't quite know how that happens.
Just a couple of things to leave you with. One, about 15 years ago, nearly 20 years ago, when we first took on Barbeito, and we'd been looking for Madeiras that weren't sort of heavy and sweet, like you've just said, you know, which had life, and we found them. Anyway, we did a series of Madeira suppers. So you start and sort of beginning, middle, and end with Madeira, 6 Madeiras, 6 courses, and it was unbelievable. So cool. Everybody loved it.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
So you know, you match the styles to what you're cooking, but it worked a treat. And everyone, it was, we used to do other, you know, winemaker dinners or stuff like that, and they were the only ones where everybody went away completely sober, but superb, you know, super happy because they just had a fantastic experience. The other thing to leave you with is good Madeira, and the top Madeiras are made in very small quantities. So in terms of it being mass market stuff, I think you've got to forget about that. This is focusing on crafted, really, you know, passionately made Madeira. And also, it's funny, the guys in the Douro for port, they get very jealous of the Madeira producers, because generally, if you took, say, a 1993, or no, let's go for a typical vintage port, and a 1997, say, vintage port will typically sell maybe for £150 a bottle, mature top grower. It's double that for a 1997 top Social, top Boal, top Malvasia. So these things are just fantastic. So I think you've got to look at Madeira in at this level, and there it suddenly makes sense.
So
I would totally agree with that. I love going to Madeira. I love the wines. The Reed's Hotel serves a better afternoon tea than you'll get at any of the top hotels in London.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know Chris Blandy, and he produces some very good top end Madeiras. Talking of the 77, just to contrast with the one we had, I just grabbed my bottle of the 1977 Blandy's Tarentaise, which is one of the new initiatives in Madeira to produce this sort of single grape, single year style. And I must admit that it is absolutely wonderful. And, you know, I'm a big port drinker as well, and have enjoyed many, many very old ports, etc. But for me, Madeira is possibly one that I'm more prepared to invest in than port in some respects.
Pleased to hear it. Yeah,
Thank you, David.
That's great. So there's some really nice comments here. A special mention has to go to David. Actually, you're in the number 2 out of 3 of a marathon Honest Grapes run. I think 3 nights in a row comes to an end tomorrow. So I hope you're enjoying so far. We'll see. We'll definitely see you tomorrow for the Terroir, our limit tasting. There's some really nice comments about the Madeira. But there's a question here, and I'm not actually familiar with what Tim mentioned about the Barbeito being something that's imported by boat to Madeira, to Cornwall. Sorry, from Madeira. Is that? I don't know about that story.
Sorry.
So is this Barbeito from the stock that was imported by boat to Cornwall?
No, not this one. We the Atlantic Rainwater, which was a blend that myself and Ricardo developed, based on this, but a level up. So the Atlantic rainwater is less Tinta Negra and a bit more Verdelho and some Cercial. So he picked some 10-year-old Cercial. We blended that in. So it's got a bit more structure to it. The Verdelho gives it some meat as well. So it's a level up and perhaps closer to the original blends of rainwater that went to the eastern border of the USA. The whole initiative was because we're very much believer in reducing our carbon footprint. So we bottled 2,400 bottles, and a sailing boat called the Greyhound, a lugger, built in, when was it built? 97, but from a Cornish privateer design, wooden. It sailed to Funchal, loaded it, and sailed all the way back to Penzance.
Ah, excellent. Okay, that sounds like, reaching for some increased efficiency. It's always good to hear. So just conscious of time, I knew we'd run over the hour by a bit, especially when you get into fortified wines and all of the stories and things that go along with those. You can see a couple of people dropping off. So if anyone does need to go and get their dinner or anything, thank you very much indeed for joining. And you know where to find myself and Angus and Nathan and anyone else in the team if you need anything out of the session. But we're happy to hang on. Just want to say cheers. Thank you for coming this evening. And we'll see you next time. Plenty more tastings to come.